They thought they had him cornered. A lone American M1A2 Abrams tank, surrounded by 5 of Russia's most advanced T-90M Proriv tanks, the pride of Moscow's armored corps. Dust filled the air, the ground trembled under the roar of engines, and for a moment, silence. Then, all hell broke loose. The Russians opened fire first. 125mm shells tore through the fields, each blast throwing clouds of dirt sky high. Through the smoke, the Abrams stood its ground, calm, calculated, and eerily still. What happened next would stun every military analyst on the planet. Moments earlier, the Abrams crew had been on routine patrol near a contested sector on Ukraine's eastern front. Intelligence suggested Russian armor was regrouping, but nobody expected what was waiting ahead. 5 T-90Ms, flanked by infantry carriers, maneuvered into a semicircle, cutting off escape routes. The Russians believed they were seconds from destroying one of NATO's most prized weapons. But what they didn't know was that this lonely Abrams wasn't alone at all. Above, circling out of sight, was a small reconnaissance drone, feeding every move to the Abrams fire control computer. When the first T-90 fired, the Abrams responded with pinpoint precision. One sabot round, traveling at over 1,500 meters per second, punched through the lead Russian tank's frontal armor, the very spot supposedly invincible under Moscow's propaganda. A fireball erupted, and the Russian formation hesitated. In war, hesitation is death. The T-90M was never supposed to fall this easily. It's Russia's most advanced production tank, fitted with Contact 5 reactive armor, Stora electronic countermeasures, and a digital fire control system designed to rival the West. Each unit costs nearly $4 million, a symbol of Russian pride and engineering might. Yet on this day, its reputation disintegrated in seconds. The Abrams thermal sight locked onto a second target. The gunner squeezed the trigger. Another T-90M vanished in a flash. The sound echoed for miles, a mechanical scream followed by silence. Inside the Russian formation, panic spread. Crews scrambled for cover, assuming they'd stumbled into a larger ambush. But the reality was worse. They were fighting an enemy that could see them long before they could even aim. Every movement they made was tracked by the drones circling above, relaying coordinates faster than human reaction. The third Russian tank fired blindly, hoping to hit something through the smoke. Its round exploded harmlessly in the dirt. Seconds later, a javelin missile streaked down from the distance, slamming straight into its turret. The explosion lit up the horizon like a sunrise made of fire and steel. The Abrams moved methodically, its heavy engine humming low as it shifted position. Its crew had trained for years in combined arms warfare, coordination between tanks, drones and infantry all acting as one. The Russian forces, still operating on Cold War doctrine, were outmatched not by strength, but by synchronization. Within minutes, 4 T-90Ms were smoking wrecks. The fifth, attempting to retreat, hit a hidden mine laid earlier by Ukrainian engineers. The resulting blast tore through the hull, flipping the 46-ton monster on its side. By the time the smoke cleared, what was meant to be a show of Russian dominance had turned into another tank graveyard. One more in a growing list of failed assaults. Across Donetsk and Kupiansk, this story was repeating itself. Russia's most advanced armor, hundreds of T-90Ms and T-72B3s, lay scattered across open fields, victims of cheap drones, precision missiles, and a battlefield that no longer favored brute force. A $200 drone could destroy a $4 million tank. That's not just military imbalance, it's a revolution. By September 2025, verified data showed Russia had lost over 1,100 tanks, nearly 10%, of its total armored fleet, with T-90M models suffering the highest losses. More than 70% of those kills came from drones alone. What was once the future of tank warfare was now a warning from the past, proof that armor without adaptation is suicide. The Abrams victory wasn't just a single skirmish. It was a signal of a new era. Warfare had evolved. Machines built for one century were dying in another, but this was only the beginning. As Moscow regrouped, Its commanders prepared to unleash a counterattack, one meant to crush Ukraine's defenses and avenge their burning pride. What came next would test not just machines, but the very idea of what power means on a modern battlefield. The smoke still hung in the air hours after the clash. What was once a quiet field now looked like the surface of another planet, scorched, blackened, and littered with the twisted remains of Russian T-90Ms. But the battle wasn't over. From it. As night fell, Russia prepared to strike back, harder, faster, and with everything they had left. Their commanders, furious over the destruction of their prized tanks, ordered a massive counter-offensive to crush Ukraine's defensive lines and trap the lone Abrams unit still roaming near Donetsk. Dozens of T-90s, supported by armored personnel carriers and helicopter gunships, rumbled into formation under the fading light. Engines roared, dust choked the horizon, and from above the faint hum of propellers cut through the darkening sky. They weren't going to retreat. They were going to erase the humiliation, or die trying. But what they didn't realize was that Ukraine, too, was ready. The entire region had been transformed into a digital kill zone. Drones watched silently from the clouds. Every movement streamed live to artillery crews and armored units positioned miles away. This was no longer a battle between tanks. It was a duel between data and doctrine. The first Russian wave entered the valley just after dawn. 5 T-90Ms led the column, followed by a line of BMPs filled with infantry. To them, it looked like open ground. But to the drone operators above, it was a minefield disguised by nature itself. A faint spark appeared on one of the drone screens, the heat signature of a lead tank. Seconds later, a massive explosion split the formation. The tank vanished in a pillar of smoke. Panic erupted. Drivers veered sideways, only to hit more mines. Within moments, the valley became chaos. FPV drones, each carrying a small explosive charge, descended like hornets. One smashed directly into a T-90's turret ring, detonating the ammunition stored inside. The explosion was so violent that it flipped the tank upside down. Through the fog of war, the Abrams crew waited, hidden behind a ridge, their systems locked on incoming targets. The gunner adjusted his scope, marked the range, and fired. The sabot round pierced through the next T-90 like a hot knife through butter. The crew didn't even have time to escape. Every hit was a statement. Precision defeating power. Brains beating brute force. The Russian commander, desperate to regain control, ordered helicopter support. 2 Mi-28 attack choppers swooped in low, launching rockets at Ukrainian positions. But waiting for them were shoulder-fired Stinger missiles. In seconds, one of the helicopters erupted into flames. The other tried to pull back. But a drone caught it in mid-flight, diving straight into its rotor. Both machines crashed within sight of their own advancing troops. The Russian infantry, seeing the sky rain fire and the ground erupt beneath their tanks, began to break. Some abandoned vehicles. Others ran for cover. But there was nowhere to hide. Artillery shells, guided by real-time drone feeds, landed with terrifying precision. Every impact was a reminder. This was no longer Russia's kind of war. The Abrams advanced again, pushing through smoke and rubble. Its sensors picked up the faint heat of a surviving T-90, limping backward. The gunner lined up the shot, whispered on target, and fired. The round struck dead center. The tank stopped moving. Another plume of black smoke rose into the morning sky. By mid-afternoon, what had begun as a counterattack had turned into a massacre. Nearly 30 armored vehicles lay destroyed. Over 100 Russian soldiers were captured or killed. And among the wrecks, burned insignias still showed the elite units once considered untouchable. Military analysts around the world were stunned. In less than 24 hours, Russia's most modern tanks had been shredded by a force that relied more on coordination and intelligence than on numbers. The myth of the invincible armor was gone. A new reality had emerged, one where a few drones, a handful of well-trained crews, and precise coordination could rewrite the rules of ground warfare. A $200 drone could now kill a $4 million tank. The cost of power had been reversed forever, but this wasn't just about machines. It was about adaptation. Ukraine had learned fast. Russia hadn't. Their tactics, born in the Soviet era, couldn't survive the 21st century battlefield. Tank columns that once rolled through Europe now burned in open fields. Victims of a new kind of weapon, invisible, relentless, and guided by data. The lone Abrams, still operational, rolled past the wreckage as the smoke drifted toward the sky. Inside, the crew said nothing. They knew what they'd done would be studied for decades. Not because of one tank's power, but because of how it proved that old empires fall when they stop learning. This battle wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new kind of war. One where the smallest eye in the sky decides the fate of the biggest machine on the ground. And as the drone camera zoomed out, showing the blackened trail of destroyed tanks stretching to the horizon, one truth became undeniable. In modern warfare, it's not the strongest who win. It's the smartest,